this video, I want to go over the assembly process of a Dart Block 427. A lot of the techniques that I use are a little unorthodox, but you'll see there's a method to my madness. A lot of the techniques that I've learned over the years, I learned when I was in 3 internships at 3 different race shops in the engine departments. Those techniques I've carried with me over the years, and they've helped me immensely. So what I want to do in this video is pass those on, some of which you may already know, but in case you don't, I feel like you'll find them very beneficial. So kick back and enjoy. All right, guys, I want to bring something to your attention. Whenever you buy these Dart blocks, you really want to buy the parts kit that is meant for these blocks. I think it's another maybe $90. It comes with the cam bearings that are specific for the Dart blocks, and I'll show you why if I can. But one thing I want to touch on since we're here is what comes in the parts kit is the cam bearings and also the plugs, these 1/4-inch National Pipe Thread plugs, along with the brass freeze plugs that you've seen earlier, which I opted to go with steel. But it's very important to use these 1/4-inch National Pipe Thread plugs that Dart supplies, and the reason being is because they actually are threaded with such a pitch and depth that they sit below the thrust face where the cam thrust plate goes. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Hopefully I'm not jiggling the camera too fast. But if you look right there, everything seats below the thrust plate mount, and that's what you want. Same thing goes for, it's very important, this lifter galley plug. You can get any 1/4-inch National Pipe Thread plugs for any of these 3 on the front, but they may not sit below the face of where they need to be, which is very important. So like for that one right there, if you just get a normal part store plug, when you tighten it up and you crank down on it, your distributor might not go in because the face of it is sticking out too far. Same thing here, your thrust plate might not go on flush. So it's very important to get the Dart parts kit and use the plugs that come with it. After building quite a few small block Fords for the Fox Body Mustangs, which is all of our passions here, I kind of build these engines a little bit differently than most would. And what I mean by that is I start the assembly process with the unconventional parts that would be assembled first. Most people go ahead right now would install the main bearings, install the crank, and so on and so forth. What I like to do is I like to install the cam first, and there's a reason for that. If you install the cam first, what it allows you to do, because you won't have the crank in here, you can actually guide the cam in by its journals slowly and evenly through all of the camshaft bores. If you do it after the crank is installed, you're basically putting it in from the front only, and you have no way to guide the back of the cam as it's sliding in, which gives you more room for error with regards to nicking the cam bearings. So this is why I put the camshaft in first. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to lube all the camshaft bearing bores, and then we're going to slide the cam in. Now with regards to the cam, I won't give the specs of the cam out of respect for the custom camshaft maker, which is actually Ed Curtis. The guy makes really good camshafts. What I will say is this, though. It is definitely a hydraulic roller, and the specs are very similar to the CompCam's XFI 236 HR cam, which is pretty much their smaller stroker XFI cam. Again, the specs are similar, but there are modifications, so it's not exactly identical, and it's ground on a billet steel core as opposed to a CompCam's typical -8 hydraulic roller cam, which is basically a cast iron cam, kind of like your normal flat tappet cams, but it has hardened lobes and a hardened gear. for the steel roller gear that you guys have to run on your distributors. So again, it's a custom cam, ground on billet steel, and we're going to install that first. So let's get to it. And again, guys, we're using the Permatex Ultra Slick. Just going to put some on the cam bearing bores, or the bearings themselves. And you don't need a ton of this stuff. You'll see quite a few people will just totally lather this thing in, but it doesn't hurt. A lot of it's going to squish out. But yeah, just put enough on there, and then you'll also put some on the cam as it goes in. Alright guys, here we go. I got the cam cleaned up, and we're going to go ahead and start to install it. Nice and slow. Be very careful as you go in to not nick any of the lobes on the journals. Matter of fact, when you get the backmost bearing journal on the cam, you can rest it in the number 2 cam bore, and at that point, and give yourself a break, you can actually grab the cam with your opposite finger and help guide the cam in. And this is the reason that I install the cams first. These cam bearings are pretty unique to the dart blocks. They have a 360-degree oiling chamfer on the back with 3 lubrication holes. There we go. And we're home. All right, very nice. Like I said, guys, there's plenty of lube that I put on the bearings, so not to worry. The lobes, I will lube those before I put the lifters in. I just don't want too much excess, because what'll happen is it'll catch any kind of debris. So that's why I did what I did. But back to the cam bearing shells on the back side. I can't show you because obviously it's, they're already installed, but they have a 360-degree groove that helps lubricate the cam even more, each journal, with 3 lubricating holes at 120 degrees. So definitely helps out. So the cam's in. All right, now let's put the cam retaining plate on, and let me go get that stuff and we'll go ahead and mount it. All right guys, let's go ahead and mount this plate. Again, back, bottom. Since we're upside down, it's going to be top. Back stays the same. Got my ARP bolt in here. Got lube on the face of the cam. Just going to start with one. Okay. Now we'll just run them down tight. Well, the cam plate is now installed. As you can see, I have the ARP bolts holding down the cam plate. One thing to note with these bolts, guys, is they are a little on the long side. Ford factory cam plate retainer bolts are a 1/4 thread by a 5/8 long bolt. The ones from ARP have a 3/4 underhead length, so I had to cut off about 2 threads worth, or about 1/8 of an inch of each bolt, and then cut new threads at the end, file it smooth to get them to work. But just wanted to let you know that might be something you run into. When you put these main bearings in, make sure to clean them very well. I've brake cleaned everything. You can see where they mic'd with an inside mic the bearing diameters, but clean everything as best you can. Cleanliness is next to godliness. The cleaner it is, obviously, the less potential of failure you'll have. Just going to put these in dry. This is obviously the center, which we all know that. The top half has the oil groove, so make sure to keep the top halves with the oil groove going into the block. And the flat side, which you'll see when I install the caps, will go into the caps. Perfect. One down, 4 to go. And I'm just grabbing these bearings as they lay out on the table. This happens to be my number 5. So that's where it's going to go, which is the rearmost. Okay. Here's my number 1. When you seat these bearings, guys, you just want to make sure that everything is perfectly level. In other words, you don't have any high spots from the bearings over the block. Get them as perfect as you can. Here's my number 2. Last but not least, my number 4. Perfect. All right. I'm going to go ahead and put some Ultra Slick on the bearings and get ready for the crank. All right, guys, I've cleaned the crank. We've put Ultra Slick on the bearings, and now comes the fun part. Let's go ahead and lay the crank in the block. You'll see a lot of people install these cranks with the studs, the main studs sticking up. I don't like to do that because if your studs are in, you risk a big chance of nicking the journals on the studs. So that's why I do that. Let's go ahead and get the caps and we'll fasten this thing in. All right, well, got all the studs in. One thing you'll notice is this stud right here in the number 3, the center main. This is the extension stud for the oil pump pickup tube. If you guys are needing the part number, if you have a 351 Windsor, it's ARP part number RWS-8, like the number 8. B like boy, excuse me. And if you have a 302 base block with a 7/16 main, it's RWS-5, B as in boy. So I figured I'd lay those part numbers out there for you because they are kind of hard to find if you don't know what you're looking for. So there's a tip. Let's go ahead and get these caps on. All right, guys, well, here's my cap. I don't know if y'all can see this. On this block, the numbers, the 4 serial numbers, excuse me, were facing forward. So, and also both bearing tangs will match each other. So if you can see, that tang will match the tang in the block, and that's how you know how these things are directional. Let's go ahead and slide this on. Going to be very, very careful. Like so. All right, guys, here's my number 2. Let's go ahead and lay this one down. Number 4. Number 1. Last but not least, number 5. lubed and ready to go. And again, just make sure all your surfaces are clean on all your caps where they meet the block. Clean the block also. You don't want anything on here. So let's go ahead and put this one on. Most people like to use the ARP Moly Graphite Lube, which is really good stuff. I prefer to use this CMD Extreme Pressure Lube number 3. It's really good stuff. I use it on mains. Now for cylinder head studs, I still use the ARP Moly Graphite. But this is really good stuff for mains. Much more accurate torque specs. That's the reason I use this. So just wanted to show you. You can get this at any high-performance race shop. Highly recommended. So I'm going to put these on all the nuts and washers, and we'll go ahead and start torquing. So all my nuts are ran down. Of course, with the Extreme Pressure Lube number 3. So one thing to note, guys, is that the studs themselves only need to be in the block finger tight. You know, I just kind of grab them and, you know, just turn them as much as I can with my hand, and that's it. I have 2 torque wrenches. One's, I think it's 100 to 250 foot-pound torque wrench. The other one is a 0 to 80 foot-pound torque wrench. So I'm going to calibrate both of them to the specs. What I'm going to do is run all the 2 center mains down to about 50 foot-pounds. And after that, I'm going to go ahead and put in the outer studs for the middle 3 caps, get those started, and we'll start torquing in sequence. But just like any standard small Ford, center out. 3, 2, 4, 1, 5. All the center mains are torqued down to 50 foot-pounds. I'm going to install the outer studs, and we'll start torquing those as well. Guys, it's in. Everything's torqued down. Inners and outers. One thing I want to focus on, guys, is when you start doing these 4-bolt blocks, the oil pump pickup extension is going to get in your way of this socket as it goes on the bolt. So you don't want to run this socket directly on the threads. So you can use a 1/2 inch or a 7/16, I think, piece of liner, like a Teflon liner, and slide that over the shaft, and then you can torque your outers and everything will be perfect. So there you go. All right, let's put the timing chain on. Well, this turned out pretty nice, guys. Just turn that by hand. That's how you want that. There is a method to my madness. The reason I'm going to put the timing chain on next, and we're just going to go dot to dot, is because remember I put the cam in, but there's nothing stopping this cam from sliding back into the block. So, you know, we're going to do a lot of hammering, if you will, knocking the pistons in. Through all that motion, the cam, if the timing chain is not installed, can walk itself on the lube of the bearings and walk itself out, and we don't want that. So that's why we're going to put the timing chain on, and then after that we're going to start slamming some pistons home. All right, guys, well, here comes the fun part. We're going to line it up on 0. The dowel will face the 6 o'clock position. Got lube on the back side. What I'm going to do is run the ARP bolt in here, and we're just going to slowly run everything on. Let me double check the dot to dot. So it looks like we're dead on. Okay. And we'll end up torquing this. But that went on just the way I wanted it to. Perfect. This chain is tight, guys. That is tight. That's the way you want these things. As I said before, I like to use the Ford Racing timing sets. They do have a cast iron gear, cam gear anyway, but that's not a downfall to me because at least for a hydraulic roller setup. Now, if you have a monster solid roller spring with some serious spring pressure, I would definitely opt for the billet steel, like a Roll Master, so on and so forth. Best bang for the buck, I think, are these, and I'll show you the part number. But these have what's called an IWIS chain. That's the brand of the company, and you can even see it on the links. Now, what does that mean for you? It's actually a German, I believe, or a Swiss-made company. I want to say it's German, but they make all the timing chains for BMWs, Mercedes, so on and so forth. So, you know, you pretty much get the best of both worlds with the Ford Racing anyway, because you have the chain, you have all the German ingenuity for the high-end luxury cars on an American muscle ground pounder, if you will. So, and this chain is nice and tight. I mean, it's perfect. It comes with a billet steel crank gear, just like normal. So I always tend to opt for parts that are from Ford, whether it's Ford Racing, so on and so forth. You know, as big a company as they are, they pay the engineers to do the best of the best, for longevity, performance, and everything. So not taken away from the other companies, because there's some other good stuff out there. But as far as some of these parts, I try to stick to Ford if I can. What I have here is the spec sheet from Total Seal. If you're using these rings, always go by the instructions. If you look here, each gap in each ring, rail, and oil scraper has a direction in the way it points within its groove. So for this one, if that's the front of the engine, then you just follow these instructions and apply your gaps accordingly. So we're going to go ahead and install the rings on the number 1 cylinder, and then we'll slam it home. And then, of course, every subsequent cylinder will be the same. One quick thing, guys. This is the oil I like to use for assembly. It's the break-in oil. It's what I'm going to use to break the engine in anyways. But it's CompCam's 10W30. And if you see, it's got the Z DDP enhanced. So it's got all your extra zinc properties to help some break in. So anyways, I'm going to pour some of this into the Tupperware. We're going to use that to lubricate the side skirts of the pistons before they go in. These are the ring compressors I like to use. They're a single bore tapered. Of course, this is 4125. They make piston assembly a lot easier, guys. I think they make some adjustable ones out there, which are in this style, but they have a clamp hose ring around them. Those are okay too. I just like using the solid ones, so just put some oil on the inside bore, slide it over the piston, and guide it in. What I like to do at this point, guys, before I tap it in, is I want to get the rod journal somewhat out of a low angle. There's a reason for this. It gives you more time to guide the rod onto the journal with the bearing than as if it was at the very top. You can't really guide the bearing. The bearing might slip out. So you'll see what I'm going to do here and follow along. See, I'm just grabbing the bottom of the rod. And she's home. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and get the upper rod bearing, slide it into position, and rotate the crank up to the rod. For the Cleveite rod bearings, what you'll notice is you'll have one of the shells that says lower. Don't know if you guys can see that. It's actually on this side. But it says lower. So obviously the lower goes in the rod cap. The opposite bearing is obviously the upper. It doesn't say it, but by process of elimination, that goes on the rod side, so they're directional, so be very mindful of that. So while I'm guiding the bottom side of the rod, I'm going to tap on the piston and guide it down a little further so that my rod can swing out and catch the rod journal as I spin the crank to attach it. I think I'll leave it right there. I'll lube the bearings and install the cap as well. All right, guys, here we go. I'm going to rotate the crank. We're going to bring it up to the rod. Just like so. Now we're going to install our cap. Now keep in mind these are directional, just as you saw earlier. Chamfers are going to go towards the front to match the fillet radius in the crank. Nice and slow. And then we'll get our bolts and run them in. Both bolts are started, and they have the ARP moly graphite for the proper torque specs. And let's go ahead and run them down. Run them down evenly. Okay. And we'll just keep that there. And then we'll start on the opposing piston, which is the number 5. And we're going to go journal by journal just to make things easier. We'll just bring the crankshaft up to the rod. Nice and slow. Bearings already in. Just like that. And we'll put our cap on as same as before. All right, first set of companion cylinders is done, and everything spins over just nicely. Of course, everything hasn't been torqued yet on the rods, but what we'll do is we'll install all 8 and go ahead and torque everything all at once. All right, guys, well, everything's done. As you can tell, everything's assembled. All I have left to do is torque all the rod bolts, but figured before I do that, I'll just show you how it looks. Let me flip it over. There it is, guys. So let's torque these rod bolts down and let's call it a day. All right, so being that these are the ARP 2000 rod bolts, I'm actually going to torque them to 75 foot-pounds. That gives me the 62 stretch that I need. I'm just going to go ahead and torque all these rod bolts and we'll be done for tonight. Not that much to it, right, guys? Well, thanks for sticking around, and I hope you take these techniques and put them to good use. I know I did, and I hope you use them in future builds. Thanks for watching.